Today we enter into day 23 of 31 as we spend another day in the book of Hebrews. We're going to continue on in chapter 11, which has been deemed the Hall of Faith chapter, which I told you yesterday is considered one of the most popular sections throughout the entire book of Hebrews, mainly because we can look at faithful men and women of God, the examples that they provided, the examples on how they lived, and we can see how they endured, how they persevered, how they were faithful, how they believed, even despite opposition, even despite circumstances, despite the consequences of their choices, despite all the hardship that they faced in life, they still endured because they were faithful to a God who promised them something greater. The writers using these stories, to show that these men and women, while they endured, today you can endure. Look at their hardships, see your hardships. They endure, you can endure as well. Ultimately, because we're looking forward to something greater than what we experience today. And today he's going to show us specifically how Abraham and some of his descendants live their lives. And he used yesterday Abel, Enoch, and Noah to show how they were faithful till the end, how they believed in a greater promise. Excuse me. So here, starting in verse 8, we're going to go to verse 22. It's all about Abraham, his son Isaac, his son Isaac, and then his sons Jacob and Esau, and then their descendants, and how the promise that began with Abraham came to fruition through his descendants. Starting in verse 8. It says, "By faith Abraham, when he was called out to go out to a place that he was to receive as an inheritance, and he went out not knowing where he was going. By faith he went to live in the land of promise, as in a foreign land, living in tents with Isaac and Jacob, heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city that has a foundation, whose designer and builders is God. By faith Sarah received power to conceive when she was past age, since she considered him faithful who had promised. Therefore, from one man, him as good as dead, were born descendants as many of the stars of heaven, as many as the innumerable grains of sand on the seashore. They all died," meaning Abraham, Jacob, Isaac, and Sarah. "They all died, not receiving the things promised, but having seen them, greeted them from afar, and having acknowledged that they were strangers and exiles on earth. For people who speak thus make it clear that they are seeking a homeland. If they had been thinking of that land from which they had gone out, they would have had the opportunity to return. But as it is, they desire a better country, that is a heavenly one. Therefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared them a city. By faith Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he had received the promises, was in the act of offering up his only son, of whom it was said, 'Through Isaac shall your offspring be named.' And he considered that God was able to raise him from the dead, from which, figuratively speaking, he did receive him back. By faith Isaac invoked future blessings on Jacob and Esau. By faith Jacob, when dying, blessed each one of his sons of Joseph, bowing in worship over the head of his staff. By faith Joseph, at the end of his life, made mention of the exodus of the Israelites and gave directions concerning his bones." So just like yesterday, all these examples that the writer's showing us here are showing us how they lived by faith. They looked forward to a promise that was ahead of them. Like you start off from the beginning, Abraham left the place where he lived and was going to where God was going to show him. God never said, "I want you to move to this location. I want you to come and follow me to a place that I will show you." So Abraham packed up his family and they left. He and Sarah left for a country that they did not know yet. They left for a country that they had not seen. And he was living within the promised land, the land that was going to be given back to the Israelites after the Exodus. He was living in the promised land, but he was moving around the promised land as a foreigner and a stranger of this world, living in tents. Why? Because he believed that his citizenship was in a greater place that was coming later, whose foundations, whose designer and builder is God. He was looking forward to a greater city, meaning heaven with the Lord. Sarah, he and Sarah together, old in age, it says Abraham was good as dead. They were so old, way past childbearing years. And Sarah and Abraham were promised before that they would have a child. And that child and their descendants would become as numerous as the stars. An entire nation would come up out of them. And they believed, despite the circumstances, they believed despite the circumstances around them that prevented them from having children. Everything pointed against the fact that they should not have children. But they believed. And because of their belief, because of their faith in the one who is faithful, the one they believed in the promises of, not themselves, but of God, they bore a son, Isaac. And out of that lineage came Jacob and Esau, the 12 tribes of Israel. And then after that, it just became bigger and bigger until one day it was as innumerable as the stars in the sky. Isaac, after he was born, God offered Abraham to offer Isaac up as a sacrifice. And Abraham, the one whose son was the one promised through him, imagine the pain and the thought process through that. This is the son you've promised me. Now you want me to offer him up as a sacrifice. But through faith, he chose to offer him up as a sacrifice, believing that God would raise him from the dead. And it says here, figuratively speaking, he did. Because before the knife came down, God stopped him and provided a ram in the bushes. And the ram replaced the sacrifice of his son. Through faith, Abraham lived. Through faith, Sarah lived. Through faith, Isaac lived. All these people lived in faith. It says in verse 13, these all died in faith, not having received things promised, but having seen them and greeted them from afar, having acknowledged that they were strangers and exiles on earth. They all did not receive what was promised to them. What was promised to Abraham? And a giant nation. He didn't see that. He saw it from a distance. He saw that with one son being born. He saw that with grandchildren, but he did not see that in the fullness. But it's okay, because he was not looking forward to that reward. He was looking forward to a heavenly reward. All these people, it says, they were living as strangers and exiles on earth because they realized that their citizenship was not here on earth. They were only foreigners. They were looking forward to a kingdom and a land that was promised. At verse 15, if they had been thinking of the land from which they had gone out, they would have had the opportunity to return. But as it is, they desire a better country, that is a heavenly one. The entire time, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob were all desiring a better country. While yes, they looked forward to the land that was promised. While yes, they looked forward to deliverance. While yes, they looked forward to all these things. Ultimately, they looked forward to a heavenly citizenship that was to come. When they left this world and they departed and went to the Father, they went to Him in faith. They lived and died in faith. It says, therefore, because of their faith, because they're looking forward into what was promised, therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for He has prepared for them a city, not an earthly city, but a heavenly city, a city prepared for them. All these different people, all these different examples, whether it be Joseph, who offered up explanation of the Exodus that would come. The people of God were enslaved in Egypt. He knew that there would be a day where delivery would come. He knew that there would be a day when they would leave slavery and they would go into the promised land. And so he wanted his bones to be carried out with them. Look at Jacob, who offered up blessings to his children. You look at the stories of all these people that were here. All of them lived by faith. They lived by faith because they believed in what was something that was greater than themselves. They believed in what God has promised. They believed that God was faithful, and they lived by faith, not by sight. Had they lived by sight, it says they would have returned back to the country where they came from. They would have stayed in the circumstances. They would never look forward to what God was calling them towards. They lived by faith. Even though they did not all receive what was promised, they all received something greater. A heavenly reward. They may not have all experienced the physical and material reward that was shown them, but they all received a heavenly reward. Why? Because they were faithful, and because of their faith, they were declared righteous, and that righteous faith pleased God. And because of that, they received the promise that was given to them. Rest with the Father. So today, we look at these examples. Men and women who went through various different circumstances, all kinds of struggles, all kinds of earthly pains, all kinds of earthly sorrow, but yet all of them endured because they lived by faith. They believed that God had something greater for them. So if you look at those examples, do you believe that God has something greater for you? Do you believe that God has something greater for you, and that's what you're fixated on? That's what your faith is dependent upon. You believe that God is preparing something for you. Do you know right now that God is preparing through Jesus a place for you? Because it says when he left the tomb, when he went to the Father, he went to prepare a place for us. So then whenever he comes home, when he comes back into this world, he'll bring us home into a place that's been prepared for us. That's amazing. Our faith is on the foundation of that Jesus rose from the dead and is preparing a place for us. And one day, when the Father gives the ultimate okay, he says, go get your bride. He's going to come back to this world and bring us home to eternity with him in the place that's been promised to us. That's where our faith lies. That's where our faith is resting in. So today, have faith in have faith in what God has promised for you. Have faith that there's something greater before you. Fix your eyes on that, and you will live by faith, and that faith will declare you righteous, and therefore you will please God, and you will earn the reward that is being held and kept in heaven with Jesus.